Many of us will remember her as the deputy president of the country between 2005 and 2008, apart from ministerial positions in the Departments of Energy and also Trade and Industry. A long-time champion of women's rights, she is affiliated with several organizations devoted to education, women's empowerment, as well as gender equality. Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka, the former UN Women Executive Director, now joins us for a conversation on the need for a bold, transformative action to reshape society for the better. Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka, welcome to the Daytime Update. Great pleasure to have you with us today, and very auspicious, it being Women's Month, and also Happy Women's Month to you.
Thank you very much, and good morning to you and your listeners.
Now, Phumzile, when we talk about Women's Month, what is the significance of us as South Africans still marking this month? What is it aimed at?
Well, it's an important time to reflect about our achievements as well as our setbacks and make a plan for the future. This year, it's particularly important because we are in a pandemic and we have a lot of work to do coming out of the pandemic.
Now, you've just actually come out of your role as the Executive Director for UN Women. Tell us about that. What was your mandate in that capacity?
Well, my core and most important mandate was to push governments around the world to change laws that discriminate against women so that we don't have women who live in countries where their rights are not protected in law. That is probably the number one priority of my agency. But then also to coordinate with the other UN agencies and go outside the UN to coordinate with other stakeholders, because the UN is not the only institutions with a responsibility for gender equality. And then to do a limited number of programs to test some of the things we feel strongly about. But that really would depend on the resources we have. So we did not do a lot of programs, but we did a lot of laws, and we did a lot of coordination and went far beyond the UN to coordinate on gender equality.
This portfolio was one with a global agenda. What would you say were some of your key achievements during your tenure?
Well, one of the things I was really keen to do was to get as many countries as possible to collaborate, to provide some peer pressure on each other so that they can all move forward. I cannot say that I was always successful in that role, at least not as fast as I would have wanted to, but we certainly did manage to push as many countries to pay attention, for instance, to gender-based violence, something we're very used to in South Africa and know about because we have that problem as well. I wanted countries to coordinate on women's economic empowerment program, both in laws and in action. And now we do have a dispensation around the world of countries setting aside 40% of their procured goods for women. And I really think that one of the important things in gender equality is women's leadership. So I was an ardent supporter of countries who needed to push forward on gender equality. So we got countries to have quotas and targets for women they want to have. We got that in private sector. But we still have a long way to go because we don't have everybody. So I hope my successor will maintain the momentum.
You talk about interventions and trying to get women in positions of leadership and women in positions where they're able to make a tangible change. Why is this important, and how does the presence of gender actually affect women in general and their status?
Well, obviously, the absence of women in decision making is a violation of their rights, because the women are not supposed just to be governed. They are also supposed to participate in governing. Having women underrepresented in decision making in institutions that take decisions that affect their life is actually a bad corporate governance. So when women are there, they fight for that to change. It is also important because this is a right. We need to respect women's rights. So the more women you have in these positions, the faster the changes are. But the fact that bringing women into decision making has not been as fast as we wanted it to be has meant that even the progress that we want to see on gender equality has also not been as fast. So we continue to push for women's participation and urge women themselves to participate. To stand up, to show interest in the work. We also have men who support gender equality. So we also urge them to continue to voice their concern, but also to take action where they have possibility to make these changes.
There are pockets of improvement. We are seeing women at the helm of some organizations, the International Monetary Fund, the European Central Bank. But how are women faring in business? The rate of women CEOs and the representation of women in boardrooms. Globally, what is the status of that?
Well, women CEOs are less than 10%, unfortunately. And women in boards are just about to reach 25% on global average. So change there is not as good as it can be. We need to push for change. That is why we have then engaged private sector to become part of what we call women's economic empowerment principles. And one of the principles is about representation of women. We push the organizations that we work with who have joined to look at their organizations and see if they're fit for purpose in terms of representation of women. We also engage with private sector through an organization called Unstereotype Alliance, where we challenge them about the stereotypes of in society about both men and women, and challenge them about changing the stereotypes. And one of the stereotypes in society is that men are leaders and women are followers, and that is not a correct stereotype.
How are you dealing with women who are finding themselves in conditions of conflict, like the woman in Afghanistan, for example, with the change and the Taliban now at the helm in Afghanistan? There have been fears that have resurfaced about how women's rights are going to regress in that country. Tell us more about that.
Well, that is most painful, because in the last 10 years, Afghanistan has made lots of progress. Women in Afghanistan are highly educated. They are powerful. They were leading corporations, leading in government, leading in the media. So the situation in Afghanistan, as you can see, does not look very hopeful. We don't know what would happen at the end of, we see what has happened now. Many of them are telling us now about how unsafe they are, about the fact that the Taliban is raiding them in their homes and houses, and the fact that their organizations are referred to as brothels by the Taliban. So we are most fearful. I don't want to pretend that we have any influence in that situation, but I think UN Women is getting ready to negotiate with the Taliban if need be. Obviously, the UN in its totality will have a lead strategy that the UN Women will be part of, but we expect it to be very hard.
And what type of negotiations do you hope to have with the Taliban? Some of the organizations that have been on the ground are saying already they are feeling marginalized, that they will not be heard. The Taliban has, for example, said that women will be able to go to school, women will be able to go to work, but all of this in accordance with Sharia law. So when these negotiations take place with Taliban, what do you hope to achieve?
Well, firstly, we are hoping to keep women and their families alive. That's very important to do that. We are hoping to open a line of dialogue with the Taliban so that we are able to reach them, as we will need to if they are the government of the day. We are hoping to open space for women to continue to participate, because there isn't anything in the Quran that says women must be invisible in everything that is said about women. So we will be engaging with them and bargaining with them for women. I mean, I'm saying they will be, because I will not be part of that now. But yeah, but it is going to be difficult.
There are women in war-torn areas of conflict like Afghanistan. But there are also women here at home. We're not a war-torn country, but there is a war that's currently being waged against women. Women have been killed. They've been killed by men. They've been killed by their partners. Just a few days ago, there was a law student who was killed by her intimate partner. On the 13th of August, another young girl, Samantha Zungu, killed by her partner as well. What do you believe would be the solution to this particular problem in South Africa specifically? How do we turn this tide around? How do we put an end to femicide?
Yeah. Well, this needs all of society. All of us can make a difference on these issues. But in the first place, you need law enforcement to arrest, to prosecute, and to make sure that those who commit these crimes are taken into custody and they pay for their crime. Because if people think that they commit crimes and they will not face there will be no consequences for them, they will do it because they can. So it's important to provide something that sends a message that says there is a price to pay if you commit these crimes. But more than that, we need to avoid and prevent these crimes from happening in the first place. So that brings us into our homes where many of these crimes happen, as well as in society where sometimes we can see these crimes in public. We need every one of us not to turn a blind eye when we see and observe a pattern of crime where we see crime being committed against women. We need to stand up, we need to intervene so that people do not think that they've got a free hand over women. We also need within families to rein in our boys from a young age, so that boys don't grow up thinking that this violence is okay. We need to talk about it, and sometimes as parents, we don't discuss these issues with our boy children. We need to discuss these issues all the time.
I'd like to ask you this, Phumzile. You said the law needs to change and there needs to be a sentence meted out that is going to be a deterrent. At the moment, the maximum type of sentence that any perpetrator could have is a life sentence or perhaps multiple life sentences. But we are still seeing the pattern. In as much as GBV is getting the media attention year after year, these cases are being televised, everybody knows about it, it's top of mind, and yet the murders continue and they continue at a gruesome pace. What are your thoughts on capital punishment? Do you think that that would be a solution as far as the law enforcement is concerned?
Well, my concern about capital punishment is that it is not the most efficient way of fighting crimes in general. Studies around the world has shown that countries with capital punishment are not necessarily the countries who are model countries when it comes to fighting crimes. The US, for instance, a country that is famous for capital punishment, I think there's much more we can still do before we reach before we reach and even think about capital punishment. Yes, we have seen sentencing of men, but not to the extent that we've seen the violence against women. Men are not facing the music in the same proportion as they commit the crime and kill women. So we still need to tighten the law and be regular in doing this. People must know that if I commit a crime, 99, 100%, I am going to be caught, and this is going to happen to me. The jails are not full of abusers of women. Abusers of women are in the community, walking free, files getting lost, and we then have the repeat of that and the repeat of the violence on women.
Let's talk a bit, Phumzile, about women having agency over their bodies. There's still the issue of female genital mutilation that persists in some communities, as well as child marriages. This has been a focus of UN Women for a while. What has been done and what type of progress has been made in your tenure during your time there?
Yeah, we made progress in laws, in awareness, and we began to decrease the number of women who are getting married at an early age. We, however, were seeing that the numbers of women, of young women who are being forced to marry were in some cases being increased by the fact that some countries in their laws have got a clause that allows for child marriage to happen under certain circumstances. Now, what circumstance is that? When they get permission, they get a permission from their parents. We have been now fighting that to be closed. A lot of parents would not permit that. They do not want to get any special measure to allow for child marriage to happen. But there's still a lot of parents who want child marriage, who think that when a child gets married earlier, it is a benefit to the family because they get resources to the family. So we have been fighting that. Secondly, sending girls to school. When girls are at school, they tend not to be married. They tend to stay at school. They fight for themselves. And now we've seen many women, girls' organizations that are fighting child marriage. So girls in the school together, they fight for each other. So it is right now, it is in that tension where we are seeing more and more girls being saved, but we are at the same time fighting with parents who want to use this exemption to send their children to marry a man who's older than them, as old as their fathers, and a man they do not know, certainly a man they do not love.
Phumzile, if you could wait for us and with us, we'll be right back. We did ask some of our daytime update viewers to pose a few questions to you. So we do have some of those tweets, and when we return in just a moment, we'll be asking you direct questions from our listeners. Do stay with us. We are in conversation with the former Executive Director of UN Women and former Deputy President of South Africa, Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka. Thank you for staying with us this afternoon. We are in a conversation with former Deputy President of the country, as well as the former Executive Director for UN Women, Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka. I did ask you to pose some questions to her. I've left a lot of those to you this afternoon. So let's go through some of the questions that you've asked, and Phumzile will answer them. From Dr. Blondie Makhene, Dr. Blondie asks, with the scourge of abuse and women being at the forefront as victims, what is her solution to South Africa's pandemic? How will she play a role in empowering women in South Africa? Phumzile, that's a question for you from Dr. Blondie Makhene. How are you going to play a role in alleviating the scourge of abuse against women in the country?
Well, thank you, Blondie. Well, I obviously don't have a wand to wave on the issue of gender-based violence. So I will be joining the women in South Africa. I suspect she is one of those women I will join to fight against gender-based violence. I also think it's important to engage men with power, authority, and resources to invest in the fight to end gender-based violence. I also think that we need to really push the law enforcers to make sure that we have the right attitude within the forces. We have formed a group of countries that are working on gender-responsive policing, who are doing everything they can to change the methods, the training, the dispensation of the laws, such that it is gender responsive. South Africa hasn't joined yet, but I'm hopeful that South Africa is also going to join, because it is important that we have that state of mind across all sectors of society. Our fight against the COVID-19 has in some ways been progressive, because you've got the same laws for everybody. Everyone knows what is wrong. It is a pandemic, therefore it has to be fought with precision. Gender-based violence is a pandemic. It needs a fight that is focused, where people join together to make a difference.
And another one from Rulani Mhlanga. Rulani asks, how did you feel when you were appointed as the first woman deputy president by former President Thabo Mbeki, and whether at that time you had any presidential ambitions? Rulani also wants to know whether you see a woman being president anytime soon.
Well, no, I didn't have ambitions to be a deputy president, let alone being a president. So it was a surprise to me, just as much as probably it could have been to Rabulane herself. And yes, I think South Africa deserves a woman president. We need to make sure that the people of South Africa do not discriminate against women, and I think that the people of South Africa are ready for a woman president. So our women must be interested in politics, and if they feel that they are up to the job, they should go for it.
I hear you there, Phumzile, saying if they feel they're up to the job, they should go for it. Here's a question here by Saxon, and Saxon says, ask her if she has the interest of becoming the president of South Africa.
It has not been my priority, I have to say. So, yeah, it just has not been my priority, but it has been my priority to be part of voices in South Africa that are calling for change, that are working for change. And I just feel I am a bit, I have reached my sell-by date in some ways, and it's important to encourage younger people to come to the space.
You bring up a really interesting discussion here. Younger people and yet you have, I guess, the institutional knowledge and institutional memory, and you also have the experience to be able to hold a position like that, perhaps with some gravitas. If you were called upon for country duty, is that a call that you would heed?
You know, I'll cross that bridge when I come to it, really. I don't want to put myself under pressure for something that might never even happen.
But it's not completely out of the picture. If it happens, you could consider it.
I'll see when we get there.
Well, I'm not hearing a complete no on that front. Let's move on to Sunny Boy. Sunny Boy asks, what do you think of the ruling party? Are you still a member in good standing?
Sorry, can you repeat?
Sunny Boy wants to know, what do you think of the ruling party, which is the African National Congress, and are you still a member in good standing?
Well, I really wish the ruling party well. I would love to contribute in helping the ruling party, helping us to have a ruling party that is fit for purpose. I mean, we do have challenges. We cannot hide those challenges. And yes, I am a member. So that is why I also feel that we've got to fix this. We cannot continue like this.
Another one comes from Maganya, says, when are you contesting ANC presidency? And I must say, Phumzile, this question has come up quite a long time. So the question here is, when are you contesting the presidency?
You know, when to contest the presidency, someone has to, you have to be nominated and all that process. I don't have plans to do that, and it's not as if I'm on a ballot of sorts that I need to consider. And we have not seen who else wants to run. So let's probably wait and see, you know, what happens broadly.
Another question here comes from Simnigiwe. Simnigiwe says, she once said male African leaders don't measure their success by how they improve women's lives, and it shows. And she's asking, how do you feel about that now?
Well, I feel in general that is the correct situation. Men do not regard, in general, do not regard the improvement in gender equality as a measure of success. But there's an increasing number of men who have come to the realization that their own success is dependent on women succeeding as well, who are measuring their own success by what happens to women. And we need to push and increase those men, the number of those men who regard gender equality as a measure of success.
Another one from Tebogoka says, would she consider playing any role in the current or future administration if approached?
Well, yes, I can play a role, that's for sure. As I say, this is my government as well, and I'm willing to do what a task of sorts in order to help the situation.
Another question here comes from, all right, I seem to have lost it, but the gentleman was asking, when are you going to thank former President Jacob Zuma for recommending you to the United Nations? And that, of course, is on the assumption that that is what happened.
Well, he actually did not recommend me. In fact, he protested at my appointment and challenged the ambassador of South Africa to the United Nations at the time for not stopping this, which the ambassador could not stop because this was a prerogative of the General Secretary. It was a competitive bid to be appointed, even though I was approached, but I still needed to do an interview, and they decided on who they wanted. So South Africa had nothing to do with it. If anything, we were against it.
And what's next for you, Phumzile?
I really want to spend some time focusing on education. That's my priority right now, and supporting the work of our education department, because we're all going through this big change that has come with the pandemic as well. And virtual education has become important. I have a foundation that does virtual digital literacy for teachers, in order to make sure that our teachers are fit for that. And well as we also do leadership training, and we make sure that specialist principals understand the discrimination of women in the education system, and ensure that in their schools that is given attention, but also just good governance. Because things go wrong if our leaders in our schools do not have the tools to govern their schools well. But I have a wonderful group of school principals that I work with in Southern Africa. We're going through Ghana now, into West Africa and so on. So we are now over 100. And then when we have teachers that we train digital literacy, and we have more than 1,000 teachers around the country. And we're also training district administrators in digital literacy. That is urgent, because this is something that the schools need now in order to be in the 21st century in the full sense.
Now, you're still packing up and wrapping things up in New York. When are we expecting you back on South African soil?
Well, hopefully at the end of this month, I should have done everything that I need to do. And I'm in a hurry to sleep, just sleep.
I'm sure that's going to be very much appreciated. So do you have anything definitive that you're coming back into, or are you going to be doing this work of education, leadership, good governance under the foundation?
Yes, I am coming into my foundation. It's all set up, and it's just waiting for me to come back.
Well, Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka, I'm sure all of South Africa is waiting for you to come back as well, and also seeing what the future has in store. All eyes on that first woman president. As you yourself said, South Africa deserves a woman president, and South Africa is ready for a woman president, but you're not quite putting yourself up for that particular role just as yet. But we thank you for your time this afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka. She is the former executive director of UN Women, former deputy president of South Africa, was the very first woman deputy president of the country, first woman to ever hold that position, and she was the highest ranking woman at the time.